Stormfather. No, I'm Wit, but I understand how easy a mistake that is to make.
Welcome to The Storming Journey, a sacred text reading of The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This podcast may contain spoilers for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth.
Welcome to The Storming Journey. I'm Adam, and I'll be the Ardent today. We're going to be covering Chapter 22 of The Way of Kings.
And I'm Liz. I'll be your Worldsinger for today.
And I'm Elle, the Veristitalian, at least for today.
Okay, so in keeping with our theme of Inanity, I was like, okay, what story do I tell about this? And I think, given all of the humor in this chapter, I need to tell my favorite joke for like 20 years, and that my husband would always like tell just the first line and that would just die, and it's really stupid. So we're gonna it fits the title, it fits the vibes of the chapter, so we're gonna do it. It is two muffins sitting together in an oven, and one of them says, "My, it's getting hot in here," and the other one says, "Ah, a talking muffin!" And that would just crack me up every time. Just the first line, two muffins in an oven. Like, you didn't even have to go further because I just would die. Especially if it was late and I was tired. So that is one of my favorite jokes. It's kind of worn out over the years, but still a good one. And just totally stupid. And I'm sorry that you all had to listen to it.
I'm really sorry, but I have to tell mine because it's one line. It's just two men walk into a bar, the third one ducks.
I love it.
Jokes that like stay with you for years are always like, they're so good. I love them. So I have our Storm's Eye view for today. Dalinar arrives at the king's feast with Adolin and Renarin. Adolin insists the king is paranoid and worries about visions. The feast is an elaborate contrast to Bridge 4's squalor. Spheres light the water, fashion reigns, and Wit is mocking. Navani has returned, catching Dalinar off guard while rumors swirl. A lonely and avoidant men's meal, another confrontation with Adolin. Navani approaches while Dalinar struggles with his feelings for her. Elokar declares Sadeas the High Prince of Information to investigate crimes. Outmaneuvered, Dalinar's role as High Prince of War may never happen. How can he trust the Vision's answers in these conditions?
All right, so today's theme is Inanity. Originally, for this episode, I wanted to go with the theme of stupidity, but I thought that, like, we just had an episode on trauma, we just had an episode on fear, and I wanted to, like, first when I was approaching the chapter, I looked at the other theme choices, and I was like, okay, it's going to be some heavy episodes. We need something that levens, right? We need something that lifts us up. And so I heard this chapter, and there's, like, a lot of joking from Wit, thank goodness. There's a lot of, like, interaction between the different characters, and I at first had the thought, I'm like, they're all being really stupid. And that's why I was going to use the word stupidity. But I was like, to have 3 episodes in a row where it's like fear, trauma, stupidity, it just like, it kind of brings a little negativity. And I don't always like the word stupid itself. Like, I don't think it's a very nice word to use. And I didn't want to quite use it. So I went to the good old dictionary, good old OED, and found a synonym on inanity. And this term, the definition for it, right, is really just a nonsensical remark or action, or a lack of sense of meaning or silliness to something, or an emptiness or a shallowness. It's a term that itself is inane in many ways. You can open it into different directions in different ways. And I'm kind of glad that I went with it because it sounds like both of you had a fun time reading it in relation to this weird word that we don't really use a lot in like common parlance, right? I don't think I had ever used Inanity before, like looking it up. And for today's chapter, what I want to do, I haven't checked this out with Liz or Elle, but I want to kind of collapse our sacred reading into our thematic reading in some ways, if that's okay. just for this episode, just kind of combine them. I chose a sacred reading of Likening. And so, like, in order to guide our reading in anatomy and guide our reading of Likening, I wanted to just like look at the 4 different character interactions, think about them in relation to Inanity, and think about them as Likening, and to what would we do in that moment? Would we be as stupid and silly as the characters are being, or would we have taken it in a different way? Does that sound okay for both of you?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea you're going in this direction. I am just going to note that when I read through this, the only notes I really put were, what is the difference between the idea of, quote, maintaining joy and whimsy under fascism and the capital-esque behavior displayed here? So I was going in, we're going to be discussing another traumatic sort of thing, a third way, which, like, you know, is fine if y'all want to do that in our Discord Patreon comments. I guess we can have out that conversation there, but like, yeah, just, you know, an acknowledgement that this is also present and comes through in my summary because I could not stop thinking about that.
Lord knows I'm always open to talking about fascism. It's like all I think about in a my Roman Empire type of way. It's because I studied dystopia for my dissertation.
I think the most relatable thing in this chapter is Dalinar hiding out with his food at the men's table and being like, as long as I'm eating, she can't come bother me, and I'm just gonna like ignore it. And then the second that he's done eating, Navani being like swooping in like a hawk, like, I am here and I'm gonna get Dalinar, by hook or by crook. So yeah, I think we all know these kind of things don't work, like avoiding people at a party or a gathering, and yet we still do them because it's just this very human response to just like go hide and be non-confrontational with things we don't want to deal with.
Okay, so let's take it with each step of who they. So I'm thinking of 4 different character interactions. So Dalinar and Wit, Dalinar and Adolin, Dalinar and Navani, Dalinar and Elhokar / High Prince of Information moment at the very end. And just taking each of those and first talking about it in relation to Inanity, and then one of us approaching it with a likening sense where we liken it by saying, what would we have done in that situation? Sound good? I'm getting nods, so sounds good. All right, so Dalinar and Wit, that moment where Dalinar's entering into the party. Wit is there on a chair and he's making fun of everyone. And he's it's where the cold open comes from. And they're having this battle of wits, so to say, this battle of puns, this battle of humor. Where do we find Inanity in there? What is revealed to us from their interaction?
One of the other notes I made was basically this entire scene with Wit is Inanity. It's just like Wit is just like saying the silliest thing that comes to mind. And I think that, like, to some extent, we talked about this earlier, this idea of Wit not caring as much about the implications of what he says because he's so old and like nobody is going to remember in 50 years what he said to these people. Like, he will, but he thinks he can live with that. And it's just, I do have to admit, there are some really funny lines. I really like the response that Dalinar gives to Wit in the cold open quote of because you blow so much air or because you make so much noise. Like, that's, I think that's really funny. And like, I think it's silly. I think it's funny, but I also think like a lot of it is meaningless. Like, Wit tries to play it off as like, oh yes, I insult people so that like they will benefit from my insulting or whatever. But like, I don't know, really? He's really kind of just insulting people for the sake of insulting people. People can't change their face if it's compared to a horse. Like, it doesn't make anyone better.
And I find it interesting that like Dalinar is like, oh, do you have to? And it relates to Dalinar's general impression of the feast. Like, he's so over all of this. Like, he sees fashion as totally inane. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this Wit insulting people? Like, this is all dumb. Like, I'm just so tired of it. He's not interested in it. And Wit is just like obsessed with the sound of his own voice and like all of the wordplay that he can come up with as fast as possible. It's just this contrast between, I guess it's interesting that Dalinar is the world weary one here when someone else is, 3,000 years old. Like he's the one who's tired of everything, but Hoyd apparently just has to amuse himself because nothing else is going to amuse him in the entire Cosmere at this point.
The point about the like having to make as many wordplays as possible to like bring in the likening here, this is very much me. I'm married into the last name of Call, and so literally anytime someone says, "Oh, that's a good call" to me, I say that's my name. So like I am someone who is like, I want to think about puns, I want to think about wordplay as much as possible, like, and I have to say it. Even if it's not necessarily the most appropriate place to say it, I tend to lean on the side of saying it anyways because I think I'm clever, and I have to let other people know that I think I'm clever.
I think if we're comparing Dalinar to Wit in this moment, though, Dalinar is world weary because he never allows himself inanity. He never allows himself at a named moment. He's always on par. He never dresses down. Like even just like him being in that very stiff suit for this party, it's because of his previous like choices and decisions, right? But at the same time, like he never takes that moment to just like let it all loose, to be inane, to not worry, to not have presence. And there are different reasons for that, right? He's a high prince. He has to lead his entire people. But it's like Sadeas does that. And that's why Sadeas is very comfortable with himself. Wit does that. And that's why that's where, as we were saying, like that's where he's finding a lot of his joy in how many years he's lived, is in these moments where he can pause and take a moment where it doesn't mean the fate of the Cosmere. It doesn't mean how he's going to stop X, Y, and Z shard from being X, Y, and Z terrible, right? And he's able to take those moments of inanity and really live in that moment. Wit here is not thinking fully about like, how do I stop big bad guy? He's just there saying, your face looks like a horse. Let me make fun of you because I don't care about you, which is not a nice thing to do. So we're not saying like that's a good thing to do. But at the same time, it's like he lives so much in that moment, even though he is so old, that is perhaps how he doesn't weary himself, where Dalinar doesn't get those moments where he's able to release the pressure that's on him and have a free and open moment. He needs to drink more of the high wine, right? So just speak.
Well, so if we're going to be likening this, I see myself very much in Dalinar. I've always been a serious person. I was born very serious. I take everything probably way too seriously. And I think this is why my husband and I get along so well, because he is much more of a like wordplay guy. He gets into a car wreck and his first instinct is to laugh. And that is not my instinct at all. And just how, like, maybe Wit is going to be good for Dalinar in getting him to take himself less seriously if Dalinar would just let him in and allow him to help him be a little less honorable all the time.
Well, I think Adolin is a really good like comparison with Dalinar of he's supposed to be following the codes the same way his father has, and he does come around to understanding why he's supposed to follow the codes, but he also recognizes that, like, he personally recognizes his need for whimsy and ways to express himself that are not constantly being on. And I think, like, to kind of reflect some of the stuff I was mentioning at the very beginning of some of the stuff I was talking about, of like, we do need to feel joy and whimsy even in the hard times that we are dealing with, or we will never make it through. We will break. Like, Dalinar never allows himself the flexibility to like decompress. And so I think that ultimately becomes some of his downfall.
So being in 2 graduate programs at once, it's almost like working 2 to 3 full-time jobs all at once. And I always have to like take a Saturday or a Sunday where I'm just like, I'm gonna do a little bit of work, but like and doing like today, for example, a Saturday, I tried to get some reading done and I just flat out fell asleep each time I was sitting down to read. And so I just said, okay, today is my off day. Like today is the day where I just need to like not do all of that. And you feel bad, but it's like you need that innate. Like I just watched like 7 episodes of Feet because I'm rewatching it for whatever reason. I love chaos, but I love inanity. But like I don't do that during the week because it's like I have to be on, but then I need that off or else I am dead for the next week, right? Like I'm going to be able to go and do the readings for the week tomorrow with a better mind because I took that moment of inaneness, that moment of inanity. And Dalinar just like lacks that so much. And it's like, it's so sad because he's like such a tightly wound sexy daddy man and just like there, right? And he just like needs a little relaxation. He needs a nafami, which he gets, but it's just like he also needs some ability to be inane, ability to sit with wit and just laugh, right?
I think that's really interesting to talk about that, like need to take time off. I used to work as an organist, and so my work day was Sunday. And so theoretically, especially in Mormon culture, Sunday is supposed to be the day of rest. But I've noticed that Mormons are not really culturally good at being inane on Sundays. It often becomes a day to do work in a different way. Like, I feel like Sundays, the way I used to treat Sundays, were like exhausting on a different level. They're often full of meetings depending on your position, or they're like restrictions on what you should or shouldn't do. It's not like a time to actually take a break and recover in a way that like helps you personally. It's like culturally, you're supposed to take a break and recover the way that you are culturally supposed to take a break and recover, which like for some people might work. But I think it like there is such a value in taking time away from burdens. I want to like think about like what helps me feel like that sense of like relief and inanity to some extent. I like whimsy a little bit better because like inanity does have this like connotation of like unnecessariness in a or like emptiness in a way that like to me whimsy is like an uplifting sort of silliness. I just want more whimsy in my life, and I need a day off for whimsy. Whimsday. I'm sorry, I told you the wordplay. I told you.
So Ella's on Wit's side in this moment. That's the likening. Liz is on Dalinar's side in the likening here. All right, we're finding out so much. All right, so let's move to Dalinar and Adolin when they have their little their conversation and their struggles. Right, it's the moment where Adolin brings up the idea that Dalinar forwarded this like let's end the conflict, let's end the vengeance pact, let's either stop it or win it. And Adolin's like, why did you do that, Dad? That was a big mistake, but also like kind of a very stupid thing. So kind of we're instead of going on to the inane whimsy side here, I think we're looking at more as inane and a sense of like not a smart approach or not a good approach, right? A shallow approach. And Adolin's viewing Dalinar's approach as very shallow. So what do we find in this moment when it comes to inanity?
I think Adolin is very aware of the social situation in a way that Dalinar is not, and in a way that Dalinar is not willing to consider. To some extent, I think this is we mentioned this, I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, which may or may not have gotten cut, but I don't remember. But the fact that like Renarin's autism probably came from somewhere, and Dalinar is definitely a good option for some of that genetic predisposition. And like he does not care about the social implications of it in the same way. And that Adolin is aware of them and wants to help his dad solve this on a social level. And his dad is like, no, I don't care about the social level. I care about the like my truth level, which I don't think is bad, but I also don't think he is willing to listen to Adolin in this moment. And Adolin is willing to hear his dad out. He's willing to say, okay, I'm going to believe that you have this truth. Can we use that to navigate this social situation? And that's very mature of Adolin, as opposed to Dalinar being like, no, I'm going to double down on my truth, and I don't care how it affects me socially. Which I think is a little bit more less responsible for his age.
It's also interesting that the inane thing to do here would be to challenge someone to a duel. Like, that's how the Alethi solve everything. And so, even though, like, Dalinar's the one who maybe made a stupid political move, he's also seeing new ways to solve problems, which Adolin finds inane. Like, an official refutation, father? Really? We're going to write an open letter, and that will solve the problem. Which is totally like the way we would solve it nowadays, and we would see a duel as going over the top. So what counts as inane is very culturally dependent here.
I mean, I still think open letters are a little bit inane now. Not in academia, though, I can say that.
You should only write closed letter to people where you sign it in your own blood or in your enemy's blood. And that is the letters that you should send. And that is not inane. That is real and sensical. So always remember, have a bottle of your nemesis' blood. I have mine right over there. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I keep it at the proper temperature.
Did you murder for it? Because I think we said this wasn't actually supposed to be a murder podcast.
Don't worry about it.
Adam's in one of those dark academia books. That's what we're doing.
I walked through hell to find my committee member, okay? I saved her and I brought her back.
That's such a good premise, and I just don't like her books, and I really want to read it anyway, because that premise is amazing.
I think we're living up to the spirit of this episode theme.
It's the inane episode about inanity. Stay with us, listener. We're going to get to better spiritual things as we keep going, but maybe not in this episode. With a likening, I wanted to approach it with, like, what would you do in that moment? Not just what connects to you, right? But that sense of likening where you put yourself into the text. So when I was growing up in the church, they would always be like, cross out the name and the Doctrine and Covenants of the person that is getting the direction from God and put your name there instead. And sometimes it's like weird because it's like, Adam, you are now the da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, that doesn't work. Like, my name replacing that name does not work, but other places it might work. Well,
just wait until your gender doesn't match at all in any of the references. It's wonderful. Lovely.
I recognize my privilege of having a penis. Did that make this explicit?
I think Wit would approve of this joke.
Especially in this chapter.
Yes.
Well, especially if you know
approve.
what a wit is, right? in English, what wit was a euphemism for.
Oh dear.
Anyway, we're not going to turn this into an explicit podcast. But so, like, in the moment, you have a father who's made a decision and he's very stuck in that decision. How would you, if you were the son or daughter, child of that person, how would y'all respond? What's the likening there? Would you respond in the same way that Adolin's responding, where he's just like, Dad, come on, like, let me go fight some duels and get this all figured out, and then you're good. You can keep being cool in our head. We can keep fighting. This will be great. You'll get over your weird little insanity that you're in right now. Just let me go to the duels. Or would you, like, how would you have approached that as a human being?
I mean, honestly, I think Adolin's made a smart decision here, especially when you do not have any real say over the person's plan of action, to be like, well, I guess that's going to work out for you somehow. Like, good luck with that course of action. I think you have to know when it's worth, like, really fighting for something. And Adolin eventually comes down to, well, I guess an official reputation is better than nothing. At least you haven't given up entirely. Like, it's fine. I'm just going to let you do that, even though, like, I've tried to explain why this doesn't work.
I think my response would be probably what like I think Renarin's ends up being is like, well, like, can we prove this? Like, let's fact check your dreams. Like, I don't know. That's very in character for me personally to be like, can we fact check this? But like honestly, that's what I would do because like if you're talking about this as a historical thing, it seems like we should be able to check if it's a thing that happened. I don't know if I would say that at a party, but I have been known to not necessarily ruin parties, but interrupt parties by mentioning things that asking if things are accurate. I'm not working on it.
I think for me, I would respond with, in a sense of the like, okay, yeah, you can do that, and that's great. But then I would also be planning my own little way of responding at the same time, or like how I would be doing my own little things. I think that's a difference that Adolin and I have, where it's like Adolin's all like gung-ho for the family, and I would be like, okay, what are my 5 other plans that I have that are hatching under darkness?
You're more like Yasna.
Yes, that is the best compliment I've ever received. I'm gonna cry. But yes, there's a reason I'm an elf color. Okay, so let's go to the inaneness when it comes to the stupidity of attraction. Part 3 in our podcast on murder, romance, in the Stormlight archive. Let's talk about Dalinar and Navani, the elephant in the party. The tension we can cut with a knife. The gloved hands that we see being put behind or in front of people's eyes. Well, what do we think? Where do we find some nonsensicalness in their relationship?
I don't know exactly where this is in my book. I'm looking, but like Dalinar remembering how Navani basically just played them both off of each other, him and Gavilar during their youth, and like they all knew she's gonna pick Gavilar, but like she strung them along, and like the inanity of dating, I do not miss at all. It's stupid. And this is my non-inane side coming out again. Like dating is dumb, which is why I settled down at age 21. So
the question is are dating dumb or are men just dumb? Let's be honest. It's probably the men are just dumb.
oh gosh, no, women are so dumb at dating, so dumb.
I don't understand women and dating, so y'all can tell me.
No, I have a friend in a Discord server who regularly shares profiles of women who have some of the most inane requirements I have ever seen, that make me question lots of things about life. So yeah, I do think it's dating itself and not just men. The thing that I think I found the most inane is actually slightly before this, and it's the whole gendered food. I am baffled. I am annoyed. Their entire flavor palette's restricted to your genitals. I just... Why? Why? I mean, there's other gender restrictions in real life that are also inane, but like, come on.
I think it's hilarious. I like that Brandon has picked some really stupid things to be gender signifiers, like covering your left hand and like eating sweet food as opposed to spicy food. And like, I relate to that because my husband hates any kind of sweetness with meat, and I am a big applesauce with pork, cranberry sauce with turkey kind of person, and he just will not do it. So anyway, but yeah, I like the inanity here that kind of points out maybe many of these things are inane.
I also thought about the inanity of like cultural structures and like our systems of how we interact, especially when like Navani pulls the stool up, and it like specifically, I even wrote down the paragraph, Navani sat gracefully, not sitting at the king's table, which was a masculine dining place, but certainly sitting near enough to be challenging protocol, which almost was our cold open quote. It was one of my like 3 that I was debating between. But like, again, that sense of like, we have strictures in our life. Some we hate, some probably we love, right? Like there are certain gendered things that are very fun, and like it's nice that it's kept only within one certain gender. And here it's like on this very big display of like how those ways that we structure life are sometimes nonsensical, sometimes don't have a bounding to a physical reality or a biological reality, right? It's
Like they talk about the competitions too. Like Dalinar's like, they're all having competitions. The men are just doing it physically, and the women are doing it like, oh, who can paint the better painting? Who can make a better musical composition? Who can insult the best? Apparently, wit's winning. Like, it's like they're all doing the same thing within their own sphere. And so, like, does it really matter what they're doing if they're doing the same thing?
wit is a gender unto its own.
There's also a level of inanity with Dalinar being like, oh, I'm going to distance you as my sister so no dating can happen. Is fascinating. Especially like, I don't know, I don't remember all of the specific like gender and like Alethi norms, but like you think of like some of the Hebrew Bible like requirements.
Levirate marriage is what you're talking about, right? That like you're supposed to marry your brother's widow so you can have children and your brother can have children through you. So it's like exactly opposite here.
And so it's like, okay, we're gonna like distance ourselves with like, oh, we have a family relationship, but Navani is like, no, I don't want to distance ourselves with our family relationship. It doesn't matter. He's dead. Also, we end up finding out that like it was kind of an abusive marriage, but like, you know, both of them would have put her in an abusive marriage. So, you know, there is that.
And she's not always on top of her perfection either, Navani. Like, no one's perfect in these books except for Yasna in design.
And maybe Wit. He thinks he's perfect.
No, Wit's not perfect. Wit is terrible. I was thinking about that when reading it originally, the sense of inanity that comes out when you don't tell someone exactly what you need to tell them is what I was getting across the entire chapter, which is why I was thinking first of the idea of stupidity, right? The being stupid where you don't just tell the person, right? It's not just telling them all, oh, hey, like there's a big thing coming, or there's a big thing we all need to fight. Instead, he's making jokes. Adolin doesn't come out and just like tell his father, and his father doesn't tell him, right? There's a inanity in not giving them the true sense of what's happening and telling them. Between Navani and Dalinar, the sense of like, they don't tell each other, yes, we have feelings for each other. They just like dance around it, right? And it's like, what a healthier relationship would have been, what a more sensical relationship would have been, had they just gone like, we have feelings for each other. And the Dalinar going, I don't feel we can culturally act on that. And Navani saying, I think we can culturally act on that. And it's like, that would have been such a healthier discussion. And it like would ruin plot, would ruin narrative, yada, yada. But like, I just think there's a sense where it's like when we hide those things, when we go into the nonsense and aren't like providing the sense, we don't always get what we need to between people and between our own relationships, right?
So to like do the likening here, you were talking about like, oh, if we'd just been upfront about this. My husband and I, when we first started dating, I don't remember if we had gone on a date yet or if it was the week after we'd gone on a date, but it was the first 2 weeks of us potentially pursuing something. I remember texting him, hey, I'm going to respond when I respond. If I respond immediately, it's because I have my phone in my hand and I'm just responding. And if I don't respond, it's because I'm doing something else because I don't respond. My speed of response has nothing to do with like me like waiting the requisite number of minutes to show interest or whatever. And like we both like sat down essentially and said that and got on the same page about it. And both of us talk about this as like, this was a landmark moment in our relationship. Like, we are going to be upfront with our emotions and how we feel. And like, that we are going to ignore this thing. And it was, in fact, very beneficial to our relationship. And being willing to say, hey, I am going to just tell you how I feel rather than like dancing around it. And it, obviously, since we got married, is the healthiest relationship I was ever in because we were open and upfront about things instead of being cagey about it.
I was also thinking this kind of ties back to what we discussed in the last episode about design and Elokar, right? That Navani and Dalinar's conversation ends with Navani being like, my son isn't a very good king, is he? And Dalinar's like, how dare you? No one can say that about Elokar. And just the stupidity of Dalinar refusing to acknowledge that Elokar is not a great king. And that was one of the things that like inspired this novel. Brandon recently talked about, though, that like the idea of the brother of the dead king and seeing his nephew being a really bad king and what do you do about that was a central like plot bunny that got this novel started, right? And that we're seeing that right here, that like he refuses to acknowledge that Elokar needs someone to tell him he's making bad decisions and not someone to be loyal and say, yes, you're a great king. Like that is not helping. And if Dalinar would just say it and help Elokar to get over it before the end of these 1,000 pages, things would be better.
I think that brings us full circle to the fourth ideal now, the fourth section of this podcast, which is the Dalinar and Elokar being very stupid or very not inane, quite kind of nonsensical because he's not being very smart about it, of labeling Sadeas into High Prince of Information when it was Dalinar's camp that prepared the saddle, that took care of the horse, that did all these things. And like Dalinar recognizes that. Elokar doesn't quite so much. And I think later on, right, we get out that Sadeas wasn't doing this to pull down Dalinar, even though like he's a little squirmy. And so like we think he's supposed to be doing it for that reason, right? And like that sense of not quite inanity, but like inanity when it comes to like a shallowness of approaching things, right? Inanity of a sense of like not talking with all of the benefactors to this movement. Because like if Elokar had talked to Sadeas and Dalinar in the same room and put forward that idea, like this wouldn't have come out, I don't think, or like people would have be able to cover themselves a little bit more. And so I'm curious about that and talking through a little bit more of that idea.
Like, Elokar's problem here is he just doesn't think at all about the implications of his decision, which is why it's inane. Like, Sadeas made him feel good, and he just followed the line of Sadeas's thinking and didn't think it all for himself, right? And I think we've all had moments like this in our lives where we just did not think about the consequences of what we were doing, right? Did not even consider how this might look to someone outside. We just did what seemed right in the moment and didn't think it through.
I mean, I think everything through. So like, whoa.
You've never had a decision come back to bite you because you did not consider all of the consequences? Ever?
Look, that moment a god appeared in my room and made me feel how bad I was and how terrible and logic I was. That's the only moment. Besides that, been perfect.
I think the inanity here to me is that of flattery. I'm thinking of a modern day political figure, but I'm going to instead pivot to a Book of Mormon figure because that's a little safer. But I'm thinking of King Noah from the Book of Mormon.
I bet you're thinking specifically of the Living Scriptures portrayal of him as someone who just wants people to flatter him. Oh man, script there written by Orson Scott Card, and so funny about how bananas come from the king because of his tax policies and stuff. And so therefore, even eating this banana is a way of honoring the king. Like, it's hilarious. Very flattering.
Yeah, but I mean, that's probably perfect. Just King Noah is a Book of Mormon character who just desires flattery, and like that is like how he stays in power, is people flatter him and give him what he wants, and so he gives them what they want without thinking about like the implications of doing so. It's just like, well, you gave me what I wanted, and so I'll give you what you wanted because I got what I wanted out of the deal. And like that's what you do with power, is you get what you want. And I think Elokar, I'm always struck by the like realization that Gavilar never meant to pass the kingdom on to Elokar. He always meant to live forever, so he never trained his son to be the ruler. And like, he doesn't know how to deal with power. He doesn't know how to react, and so his reaction is, well, I assume that power is you get what you want, and you give people what they want, and Sadeas is giving them what he wants, which is security regarding assassins, and so he's like, well, obviously, this will help me, so, like, I'll give Sadeas what he wants.
But also there's a comparison to that in Yasna with how they both react to power in different ways, right? Where Yasna goes out and gets power, and Elokar, like, falls into power and trips into power and then acts that way. But in thinking about that, there's a gender difference there, right? But there's also how they were raised different because of that gender, but also it ties back into the people that Elokar became friends with, the Wistio, and all of that, which ties back into the broader narrative here, right? Of like all of the issue coming from those who you form community around, those who you form unity with, right? As being like one of the key contentions in this struggle. And it brings out a very inane king, right? When he like was partying when he was in his early 20s and like didn't really care about power or learn those like ideas. Yes, because his father wasn't preparing him, but also because he didn't go out and do that himself. Right. I think if I were in that moment, and I mean, if I was living on Elkar's life, he'd live Elkar's life, how Elkar lived it. But if I was there, right, I think I would try to teach myself a few things, thinking, oh yeah, my dad's going to die someday. I'm going to take over this kingdom. I might want to learn a few things, maybe one or two, not three. But his like the community he surrounded himself with, and then the influence that had on him affected where he is now, right? And being this very nonsensical approach to power, this very inane approach, this very like live and let live, like let's all just like have a party while we're getting vengeance rather than actually delivering vengeance and then ruling our kingdom. And there is a sense as well that like he doesn't get the training of ruling because it instantly went from my dad's dead, let's go get vengeance. And so he's trained in his kingship on the Shattered Plains in that parties and having fights all the time, to where he can't find or figure or understand what a sensical way of being a king is, because he's never ruled from Kholinar, because he's never ruled his people even from home, right? So there's this tension there that I really like that you're pulling out.
I think some of the evidence for the like argument you're positioning of like his community is reinforcing his inanity is that we see with Wistio in his reaction to Kaladin's family is not like a sensical approach, because it hurts the family to have Kaladin leave or Tien leave to be sent away to war. But like Wistio's reaction is that benefits me to punish you. I get to enact my vengeance on you. Even if that hurts our community, I get to do that. And I think that's like, that was the environment that Elokar maybe was trying to surround, was not necessarily intentionally, but he was surrounding himself with that kind of approach to leadership of, I do what I want because I can, because I have the authority and power to do that.
Right, I think it's time to turn to our Wisdom of the Heralds. So this is the moment in the podcast where we think about what we're going to take into our life from all this discussion of inanity. So who wants to provide our first wisdom?
I can do it. I think realizing that I am like Dalinar has reminded me of like my constant struggle to not take myself so seriously And so I need to just do something stupid this week. Waste some time without feeling guilty about it. Yeah, that's my goal.
For the bit, I'm giving myself a Wednesday every week. It might not actually be on a Wednesday, but like if I am going to take time off, which I do need to do, I have been really bad at saying I'm taking this whole day off. I, for my own mental health, need to take a day off. And it should be my Wednesday, where I am subject to my own whims of doing what I want. As long as it's not work, because unfortunately sometimes I do want to work. But I will not. I will be whimsical instead. Or at least I'll try. I don't know. We'll see how this goes.
I think for mine, it's a little different than everything we've been talking about, but it's being a little bit more deliberate in the approach of what I'm doing in order to have that type of Wednesday or to have that type of nonsensical moment. Because like what I always come up against is like I'll have to take a nonsensical day because of everything else that's going on, but then I'll feel so rushed afterward that the next day I feel so caught up. And so I think trying to be more intentional in how I approach the scheduling throughout the week in order to save that time and like guard it is what I'm going to try to approach with, in a sense of kind of doing opposite what Alakar did and opposite that, just going with the flow and perhaps having a go with the flow moment, but like being able to accomplish that and achieve that go with the flow by being put together in all the other aspects of my life, which is a hard thing to put together because I just live life with whimsy and intention all at the same time, and it's a rough way to live life.
I think that it is important to be intentional about the whimsy to safeguard it, because I noticed that if I'm not trying to structure my life in a way where it's like safeguarded, I get to Sunday and I'm like, oh, I haven't done this thing that's due tomorrow. And then I have to do it and my Wednesday is gone. So I am with you there, Adam, in I need to structure it better. So I appreciate the reminder that there needs to be some level of intentionality to make a Wednesday work effectively.
Just be sure to structure it according to gender and to cover your hand and to only eat sweet rather than spicy food. That's it. That's how you structure life.
Thank you for joining us today on The Storming Journey. You can support our work on this podcast by subscribing to our Patreon, leaving a review, or sharing the podcast with a friend. We hope you'll join us next week, and in the meantime, remember, journey before destination.